Thank you, Pastor Manning. We are in sacred space, and it's important for us to acknowledge where we are, the history that brings us to this moment. I am in so many ways overwhelmed, and so I want to thank Pastor Manning for opening this special house to us. I want to thank all of the people who set up the chairs, who turn the lights on, who will clean up after you leave. Don't leave them much to clean up. All the people who are behind the scenes that are making this moment possible. So we want to give them a round of applause.
Can I jump in for
Sure.
a second? Well, I also want to, first of all, thanks to all of you. This is just a profoundly moving sight for an author to see this sacred place filled up like this. So thanks for your interest in the book, and thanks for coming. And thanks to Sarah Moriarty and her incredible staff and board at the Literary Festival. I got to tell you, a few months ago when she called me up and said, I've got this thought you could appear at the festival to talk about the book, and I want to get Eddie Glaude to interview you and the choir to perform. I responded like any right-thinking person would, as if. But here we are. So I cannot thank Sarah and her incredible festival for making this happen. And yes, thank you. And it really is the privilege of my life to be sharing this stage with you.
Oh, thank you.
It is.
So let's jump into this. Let's jump into this. Give us the scene. Give us a sense of how the book opens and what you're thinking.
Okay. Well, let me talk a little bit about sort of how I came to that night, or my experience of that night. I was at home. We lived in the Atlanta suburbs. I was watching CNN and reading the newspaper, and I was watching as the very first report came over about a shooting at a church in downtown Charleston with mass casualties. And I thought, well, that's weird, not something you hear about every day. But I started thinking, well, could have been a domestic dispute, could have been a robbery even. And then a sentence or two later, they had identified the address and the name of the church as Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I'd never heard of the place, but my heart just kind of sank. The fact that it was an African Methodist Episcopal Church sparked my every jaded journalistic instinct. I just thought that I had a feeling that this was going to wind up being the horrific hate crime that it was. And as I said, I had never heard of the place, so I started Googling the church, and up popped these snippets of history, skeletal history, but amazing. And this was the oldest AME church in the South. It had been born out of this almost subversive walkout from white Methodist churches by African Americans during the height of enslavement. It had been associated with this amazing slave insurrection plot in 1822 that had been put down, and 35 people had been hung as a result. The people that had spoken from this pulpit, Booker T. Washington in 1909, Du Bois in 1921, Dr. King in 1962, his widow, Coretta Scott King, in 1969. And it had this storied civil rights history led by Pastor B.J. Glover, who was also the branch president of Charleston's NAACP at the same time. And there were marches and demonstrations that were led from the fellowship hall one floor below, where we are, mass meetings held in this very space. So I was just awestruck by everything that had happened at this place. And now this. And this was clearly going to be a marker in our racial history once we quickly learned who the shooter had been and what his motivation had been. And I very quickly started thinking that, there's whatever ends up happening with this crime, there's a bigger story in this church. And it's a story that shouldn't be obscured by its lowest moment of what happened that night. I also thought it was important that people should understand why it mattered that this happened here, as opposed to some other place. And it did matter here. I mean, I think there's still an open question about how much detail the killer knew. But we know that he had a visceral understanding that this was a historic AME church. And he had a visceral understanding of the role that the black church played in the freedom movement. And so I think we could tell very quickly that his intended target wasn't just whoever he happened to find in the fellowship hall downstairs. It was an entire people, and that this was a symbolic genocide of sorts. So I came over for the New York Times. I think I got here Saturday or Sunday following the Wednesday night shootings. Very sort of obsessed with this notion that this church could be used as a vehicle to tell the larger story of African American life in Charleston. Right. And that had real value for a couple of reasons. One, it's Charleston. I argue in the book that there is no city in America that's more vital to our understanding of our racial narrative in this country than Charleston. 46% of all enslaved African Americans who disembarked in North America did so in the port blocks from here. And of course, we all know the Civil War began here. The other thing that I thought was really valuable was that the church had been around for so long, because it had been here 200 years. You could use it to tell this long story of African American life here. So much of our history ends up being limited to a single personality or an event, a decade even, maybe a movement. This, I thought, would allow me to tell that story over time and show the connectedness between events and people and movements one to the next. So, I very quickly sort of came up with this concept that I hope would prove true. Needless to say, it took years of research before I really became convinced that it proved out. But that was the opening notion.
So you have this sense that the horrors of that evening can serve as a kind of portal, a kind of point of entry to this broader story of the tragedy of race and democracy in the United States. And then in September, in front of Congress, Kash Patel is asked a question about Dylann Roof. Yeah. And he says, "Who's Dylann Roof?"
Right.
What do you make of that?
I was flabbergasted, almost speechless, I think, by the insult I felt. And that was me, so I can imagine what people who had a more direct stake in this event
people like
must
me.
have felt.
Mm-hmm.
It was mind-boggling to me that he could not know. And of course, it led me to think, well, is this just posturing, or does he really not know? And his agency investigated this crime. This man is one of 3 people on federal death row. Seemed impossible that he could not know this. But it also felt very emblematic of the effort that we see at the highest levels of both the federal and the state governments to erase a lot of this history, to deny it, to act as if it just didn't happen.
So we're going to get to that near the end of our conversation, but now let's kind of go back to how you set this up and how you set this story up. It's a wonderfully framed or structured book. I like to think of it in terms of these concentric circles, right? You have this telescoped moment, which is the horrific event. Then Emanuel becomes part of the story. Then Charleston, the South, right. And then the U.S. So give us a sense of this historic scope. Let's talk about this church and how how it came to be. I want to give the audience a sense of the historic sweep of black denominationalism and how AME fits within this, and particularly Charleston in this story.
Well, the church really has two separate but related origin stories, and they're equally fascinating. The first didn't happen here. This is the second site for this congregation. The first was a mile or two from here, Charleston Neck, the corner of Hanover and Reed Streets. And in 1817, there was this, as I mentioned before, sort of this subversive walkout by African American Methodists from white-governed Methodist congregations around town. There had been a series of indignities over time in the way that black worshipers were treated both in worship and in governance. A new preacher in charge for the Methodist denomination had arrived in Charleston and started to rescind some of the mild privileges that had been given to black congregants to, for instance, collect their own collections during church, and to some extent to distribute those collections. There were rumors that some of that money was being used to pay for the emancipation of enslaved people. That really set off the white governors of the Methodist churches, and there was a crackdown. The straw that really broke the camel's back was a decision to build a garage for a horse-drawn hearse over a black burial ground. Those of us who live in Charleston now know that black burial grounds are sort of a sensitive topic. We've got a big controversy going on as we speak concerning one.
Sensitive topic is an understatement.
Yes. So that was the spark that led to this walkout. Morris Brown, everybody knows Morris Brown AME Church. Morris Brown was a shoemaker and a lay preacher who led this walkout, became the first pastor of what was only known as the African Church at that time. And there was almost an immediate blowback from the white authorities. Arrests were made, ministers were hauled in, services were disrupted. And then, yes, after the Vesey insurrection plot is discovered before it ever has a chance to mature, if it was ever going to mature in the first place, there are scores of men arrested, 35 are sent to the gallows. My research showed that fully half of those had some direct affiliation with the church. It really felt, when you read the trial transcripts, like the church itself was on trial as much as any of the individuals. And the church is destroyed, dismantled, board by board, on the order of the authorities. So that's the first origin story, and it really reflects, obviously, two things, right? It reflects that, yes, there damn well was a lot of resistance to enslavement, even at that period of time, and that the white authorities were not going to tolerate it. There was this, immediate and severe crackdown. The congregation essentially stays underground, if you want to call it that. Dormant might be a better word, until the end of the Civil War.
Albert Rapertel describes it as the invisible institution.
Perfect. Right. The war ends, and there is already an AME presence south of here in Port Royal, which Civil War buffs will know was an area that was taken by Union forces early in the war and held as sort of a staging ground. AME missionaries had gone down there at the invitation of the Union forces to provide to the spiritual needs of these thousands of newly emancipated people that had come off the plantations in that area. And so they follow Union troops directly into Charleston and establish a beachhead here. There's this almost land rush for these newly emancipated souls. And because of the legacy that the African Methodists had here from the earlier church, it quickly and easily wins this competition. And before long, the AME denomination is the single largest Protestant denomination anywhere in the city. This piece of land is bought in 1865, and this is one of my favorite stories from the book, one of my favorite discoveries. I spent time in the Register of Deeds office in the county building trying to find the original deeds of sale for both of these property purchases. And when I found the one for this land, and it's in these wonderfully dusty old volumes in the archives, just, it feels just like it's supposed to feel. And you find it, and there it is, and it's great because there are all these names, right? Names of the trustees of the church that I could then go back and do genealogical research on. But also the name of the seller. And the seller was a guy named George Alfred Trenholm, who I had never heard of. My wife, Dina, who's sitting here in the second row, Googled it one afternoon and discovered that George Alfred Trenholm happened to be the Secretary of the Treasury of the Confederate States of America at the close of the war. One of the wealthiest men in the South with vast interests in shipping, banking, all sorts of commerce, major slaveholder. His ships ran blockades during the war. His company had a heavy role in sort of maintaining relationships between the South and London. And at the end of the war, he, like other Confederate leaders, is arrested and jailed. He's in ailing health. He's at Fort Pulaski down near Savannah, and his empire is crumbling. And he has to shed assets to generate cash, and he instructs his agent to sell that piece of property on Calhoun Street. It winds up being bought by the trustees of what becomes the first black church in Charleston, South Carolina. So just an incredible reversal of fortunes.
Indeed, indeed. And what we get in this story, I think, is really important, is to understand that before one cannon was fired at Fort Sumter, the Civil War had already happened within the context of American Christendom. The split between North and South.
That's right.
Has already happened, right? And what's ironic, of course, is that these Methodists, they were actually, along with Baptists, considered upstarts. These were the folk who were coming out disturbing the religious landscape with their ecstatic worship and the like. And they were initially anti-slavery.
Correct.
And so what we get in this history of the story of American Protestantism in particular, right, is this shall we say, this movement back and forth, this compromise, what Frederick Douglass would describe as this interesting juxtaposition of the church steeple and the slave auction block, right? And the way in which it shadows the very way in which people are embracing the idea of what it means to be Christian, right? Because, a part of your story that you lay out is that not only do they want to build on top of a burial ground, they're not offering these folk who make up the vast majority of Methodist churches in this area, they won't even let us bury our dead. So the segregation cuts beyond life, but into the ground.
Right.
In so many ways. So we get this story. We get the story of the African church. We know so much about Absalom Jones. I'm a Morehouse man. I know you can tell. But Morris Brown College is right next to us. The only college in the Atlanta University Center named after an African American, right? So we knew all of this stuff. And then, of course, you get Daniel Payne. He's an important figure that helps us tell this amazing story, not just simply about missionary moms missionary women coming into the South post-Civil War, but the importance of the AME making their way into the South. And we get this church, and you tell the story of this church as if it's an activist story. But before I get to the 20th century, you do something that had my mouth wide open. Now, Denmark Vesey, man, you can't be messing with Denmark Vesey. Tell them what you found about the Vesey insurrection, please. And we don't have much time, so I want you to compact it.
Compact it.
Right. I want you to,
Oh, so you've been listening to my answers.
You see, I got all that in.
No.
So, but talk about the Vesey stuff that's so important.
Well, there's been this raging historical debate for the better part of, 3 or 4 decades, I guess, about whether the Vesey revolt really was, whether it actually was the insurrection plot that it was reputed to be, or whether it was, ginned up by local politicians for their own purposes, largely to justify the crackdown that followed it. And there was an intense crackdown that followed it, not only the destruction of the church in terms of the microcosmic impact on this place, but the state legislature passed a series of laws that lasted all the way until the war that greatly restricted the very few freedoms held by the enslaved, and particularly by free people of color, because Vesey, of course, was a free person of color. He was the only free person of color who was hung as a result of the insurrection plot. But he was identified as a leader, and therefore it validated all of the fears that white Charleston had about these free black people. And
y'all okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing that's interesting about the Vesey story as it pertains to the church is, as I mentioned, the trial it made it seem like the church itself was on trial. Every defendant, every witness was asked, was he a member of the church? Are you a member of the church? And the mythology for generations has been that as a result, the church was burned to the ground on the order of authorities in this dramatic conflagration afterwards. Well, thanks be to God for the digitization of newspapers. I can't claim credit for discovering this, another scholar did, but several years before I started my work, he was Googling African church I guess he wasn't Googling, he was looking through newspaper databases, historic newspaper databases, for African church just to see what would pop up. And up came a series of advertisements from August 1822 Charleston newspapers from an auctioneer advertising all of the lumber from the African church to be sold on this date and this time. So it wasn't burned to the ground. And that sort of left me to make a few assumptions, which I made, that it had to be torn apart board by board, and probably by the same hands that had nailed those boards into place, the same black hands that had nailed those boards into place. And as I thought about it, that had to be almost more traumatic than the fire narrative, right? To see their work destroyed after this incredible assertion of autonomy. Mm-hmm. And I just think about, what they must have been taking away from that moment.
And in May of 1866, we get the church, right?
Yeah.
Get this church, and then you're going to tell us a story about how important Mother Emanuel is in terms of responding to the political moment, responding to the violence that led to the consolidation of the Jim Crow South, right. And of course, efforts to respond to that. Talk a little bit about this phase as we move through what some historians call the nadir, the lowest point in African American history. I disagree with that, to the point where we see this as a mobilization space. As I was on King Street, walking past Chris, thinking about the student sit-ins and the like. So talk a bit about this historic arc.
Well, one of the things I think really made the book viable as a concept was that I found that there were these larger-than-life figures at the head of the church that I could use to represent every significant era in the Black freedom struggle. And during Reconstruction, it's Reverend Kane, Richard Harvey Kane, who, not buried there, but memorialized there, who was an AME pastor in Brooklyn who was sent down to start the AME movement in Charleston. He becomes the first pastor of what then becomes Emmanuel. It's no longer the African church. It is named Emmanuel, God with us. Mm-hmm. And Kane uses this pulpit as a springboard into business, real estate, publishing, buys a newspaper, which gives him an incredible voice in this town, and eventually into politics. Runs for the state legislature and wins, runs for Congress, and becomes one of only, I think it was 16 African American Republicans who served in Congress during Reconstruction. So his story, I mean, he is the personification of the incredible hope of Reconstruction at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then by the end, he's the personification of the crushing disappointment and the theft of Reconstruction, because he has lost his office. He has sort of retreated back into the church. He's even flirting with the Back to Africa movement. He's sort of thrown his hands up and decided that there's just not that much that can be done in the country anymore for the cause of social equality. And his successor down the road, B.J. Glover, who is the longest serving pastor of this church, 12 years from, I think it's 1953 to 1965. And so he was the pastor during the meat of the civil rights movement. He comes in as a raging activist. He's got good reason. He's had the crap beaten out of him by the Klan early in his life as a response to his efforts to attempt to register to vote in upstate South Carolina. And he's seen a lot. And so by the time he gets here, he is out of patience. He has seen soldiers coming home from war and being disrespected.
Blinded,
like Isaac Woodard, yes. And he has no more patience, and so he is at the forefront of the ministerial component of the civil rights movement. And as I mentioned before, there are mass meetings right here, one after the next, NAACP leaders speaking from the pulpit, marches and demonstrations kicked off from the fellowship hall downstairs. There's a wonderful picture in the book of him wearing a sandwich board during a demonstration on King Street, arrested multiple times, including once in Columbia with now Congressman Clyburn, who will be speaking at the festival next week, in a case that goes on to generate a landmark Supreme Court ruling in support of the right of peaceful protest. So, he was just an incredibly courageous, committed guy, and not without resistance from his congregation. There was a lot of fear in these pews about his activities, and good reason, because in 1963, if not earlier, but certainly by 1963, there had been the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham that killed those 4 young girls. And so these church members are thinking, we don't know that we want that coming our way. And there was always has been very much an institutionalist sensibility to this place. It was such an achievement to build it. And it was in some ways a radical act in its very existence that I think many of the congregants over time have said, the most important thing is making sure that we hold on to this, that we have this safe space, this sacred space. And so there was a broad fear in the congregation that was going to be put at risk by his activities.
So obviously there are through lines in the text, and one, of course, is violence. That the fever dream, how can I put this? That there are these moments where white America, where white Charleston seems to lose its damn mind. And it has something to do with the fact that white Charleston believes that it's the possessor of freedom,
right,
to give and to take away. And so we see these cycles over and over again, right? So because we got to track the violence, because what we're trying to get to, what happened here with Dylann Roof, right? That it doesn't come out of nothing. There's this broad history that you're telling us about this. But then there's an aspect of this story, Kevin. I'm reading this and I'm like, how is this white man actually getting into the muckety-muck of church politics. I mean, because it's not hagiography, right? It's not just a story of this politicized pulpit. It's not just a story of the activist AME. You actually get into the messiness of church politics. Pastor Manning, this is a complicated place to lead. Talk a little bit about what was going through your mind as you decided to write about, church politics. Because if you can survive black church politics, you can survive any kind of politics. All right, so talk a little bit about that.
Well, you sort of answered the question yourself. I mean, you used the word that I would use, which is I wanted to avoid hagiography. And I think, churches are real places just like all of our institutions are, filled with human beings who often do not get along. This place in particular has its own special challenges because of the age of the congregation, meaning the length of time it has existed, as well as the chronological average age of the membership, which is quite advanced. The traditionalism of the congregation, which frankly has made it hard to attract new members at times. So it has had its own special political challenges, and yes, it is a very difficult place to govern, and I've had a lot of empathy for the pastor the last 10 years as he has tried to navigate.
You see how he's talking? He knows there's some AME bishops that got it.
You may never know who's in the audience. Yeah. But I tried to look at the messiness of church life in a couple of different ways, both within this building and within the denomination. And a lot of us who lived here know the story from within this building. There was, in my mind, sort of an inexcusable revolving door of leadership in the first year. Pastor Manning is the third pastor, was the third pastor in a year's time at a time when the church really needed stability above everything. There was a financial scandal that we all know about having to do with contributions that came into the church, and there was a feeling that they weren't being properly accounted for. That led to a state police investigation that had no findings of any sort of criminal fault. And there just was a lot of, you can imagine. Think of church at a normal time. Now add the assassination of nine people in your fellowship hall. There's no playbook, right, for coming back from that. No one's ever had to do it before. And there were members who didn't want to come back in. There were disagreements over whether to come back in at all. They wound up being back in church on the first Sunday after the Wednesday night because the presiding elder who had become the pastor felt very strongly that a statement had to be made about the durability of both the physical church and of the faith. On the denominational level, I thought it was important to understand the denomination's history, which I knew nothing about when I got started, and its governance, because it has everything to do with the way this place operates. And it's not a unique governance system, but it's certainly an interesting governance system in which there are, the denomination is led by a panel of all-powerful bishops who are elected at quadrennial conventions called general conferences. They campaign for 4 years, they spend a lot of money, they travel all around, and once elected, they have almost absolute authority, including the power to appoint every pastor of every church in the country for 1-year terms. And so they can sort of pluck people and move them around almost at will. And what that means for a church like this one and for a pastor like this one is that a new pastor arrives without any buy-in from the congregation whatsoever. He's appointed by the bishop. The congregation may not know him or her at all. And so there's automatically this tough situation where trust has to be established,
Right.
often antagonistic. The denomination's also had its own series of scandals, including its worst financial scandal of its history a couple of years ago, a pension scandal, which tens of millions of dollars went missing. And ministers who had been counting on the money to retire on found that it wasn't there.
Okay, I'm going to save you now. We're not going to talk too much about that. We're going to move. But I think it's important for you as you read Mother Emanuel to understand that he's not painting a picture of the church, the denomination, as if it's faultless. It's a complex picture, not only of the people, but also the very bones of the church itself. And so it's an extraordinary account. As a person who studies African American religion, most people don't know I'm a philosopher of religion, and this is what I do. It's a wonderfully rich account, and you do a really great job in managing all of the source material and making the story pop from the page. But I want to, before we open it up for some questions, I want you to. He has a wonderful chapter on Reverend Pinckney here that you need to read and read carefully. Tells a story that links us to that political effort, right? Those preachers who are also engaged in the politics of it. But I want us to get to forgiveness and grace, that powerful moment at the end. Talk a bit about that, because you write about it in such a compelling way.
Well, that was really the through line of this whole exploration. Yes, I was fascinated by the church's history and wanted to play out this notion that the church's story could be used to tell this larger story of life in Charleston. But the other animating theme that courses through the whole book is forgiveness. And what did it really mean in the context of what happened here? I mean, I think when that bond hearing happened, and I was watching on TV like many of us probably were, and I saw those 5 family members get up to the microphone and offer some expression of forgiveness towards this then, and we assume now, utterly remorseless, unrepentant white supremacist mass murder. I think, like all of us, I was sort of awestruck and befuddled all at once. And I wanted to know what it meant within the context of centuries of black suffering and within the context of the teachings of the black church. And I really decided that it was by studying the history of the church and the denomination that I might figure that out. Obviously, I interviewed all of the family members who did forgive, and it wasn't just the 5 who were at the bond hearing. It was also Chris Singleton, who many of us know, who was the son of Sharonda Singleton, one of the victims. The night before the bond hearing, he and his sister Cameron, they're both teenagers at the time, walk out of a memorial service at Goose Creek High School where his mom had taught. And a TV reporter shoves a microphone in his face and says, "What are you feeling right now?" And he says, "There's nothing but love from our side of the family right now, and we've already forgiven him for what he's done." So in interviewing Chris and the 5 that spoke at the bond hearing, as well as any number of ministers, theologians, and folks who didn't agree with the decision to forgive, I really concluded that those of us who may have perceived that the forgiveness offered toward this killer as being for the killer probably misunderstood its intent, and probably didn't understand the role that forgiveness and grace have played in the black church over the generations, and that they will tell you it was for them, not for him, that it's a form of release, a form of relief. And when I started to think back over the 200 years of trauma that I document in the book, it starts to make a lot of sense that that's the only way you can get through. How else do you, as Felicia Sanders and Polly Shepard, 2 of the survivors, will tell you, how else do you get out of bed the next morning without being so consumed by rage and fury and frustration and anger and the temptation to respond with violence. How else do you get by? And so in that way, to me, it seemed that the forgiveness that they expressed was almost a reclamation of agency. It was them saying to this killer that, yes, you have taken my loved one, but it ends there. You're not taking me. You're not taking my ability to live the rest of my life with joy and purpose and meaning. And so, the other word in the subtitle of the book is resistance. I think it was an act of resistance. Just like Morris Brown resisted, just like Richard Harvey Kane resisted, just like Denmark Vesey resisted, just like B.J. Glover resisted. Not in the same way, not out on the streets, but certainly a global statement in the case of the people in that courtroom.
One of the powerful things about African American Christianity is that it rejects the idolatry of white Christianity. The theologian Howard Thurman said that the slave dared to how did he put it? The slave dared to redeem the religion profaned in his midst.
That's right.
And so this act of forgiveness is that I will not become that which seeks to destroy me. Right? So this is beautiful. Now you had a question though about this moment of forgiveness.
Yeah, I did. Well, so we all know that we saw this amazing illustration of the ongoing role that forgiveness plays in our political discourse 6 weeks ago, I guess it was, when Erica Kirk got up at the funeral of her husband and offered forgiveness to his killer.
What were you feeling at that time?
Well, I'm still trying to figure it out, and I'm interested in your take, because on the one hand, my instinct was to say, I can't judge her. It's beyond my place to judge that her sincerity is any different than that of those who forgave here. At the same time, I'm thinking it didn't have the same spontaneity, obviously. It was scripted, it was planned. It happened in a political theater to some extent, in a political context. But I'm still trying to grapple with whether we're allowed to see her Christian expression as any different than what was expressed here. We talked about this earlier. I didn't focus on her use of the word forgiveness. I focused on her use of the word enemies. Because in the midst, she said, we must forgive our enemies. And at that moment, right, in which the language of forgiveness was being invoked, she described those who opposed the positions that her fallen husband held, and others as enemies. Right.
And then of course Donald Trump jumped right on it, right afterwards, right? I don't know if I can forgive because they hate me, I hate them, and
he hates his enemies.
Yeah, he hates his enemies. And so what I find absent among the family members of those folk is there's no talk of enemies.
Right.
That forgiveness talk, of course, is this directed, not that directed. It's a kind of soul maintenance in the face of unimaginable grief.
Right.
This is why I think, and we talked about this, when President Obama reached for Amazing Grace, I wasn't so convinced. I was like, at that point, we need to be singing Thomas Dorsey's Precious Lord. Because there's a level of grief and sorrow that cut, I can't, I'm tired, I'm weary, right? I don't know how to make it, to get up tomorrow, right? And then that faith kicks in. Yeah. So there's a difference in the accent You know, if you put an accent de grave as opposed to an accent aigu, how it can change the sound of something.
Right.
She had the accent in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I deny her. I deny her the thing. So with that, right on time. You all we got some microphones, we got some runners. You can ask questions all to Kevin. And I just want to say this is a remarkable book. It's a remarkable book about an extraordinary institution. And this institution is right here in Charleston. It's yours in so many ways. And if you understand its history, you can better understand yourselves in this city. And he's done a wonderful service. So to me,
I didn't want to stand up before you guys were done clapping. That felt weird. I just want to thank you both. This is amazing. I was at your talk at the Charleston Library Society, and it was wonderful, but the whole time I was like, why are we here? Why aren't we there? Mm-hmm. So I'm really grateful to be in this space with you. My question is, and I'm trying to think of how to say it, is I'm looking around the space, and I've been in this space a couple of times, and it feels very white. I just want to call that out. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to ask both of you from your different lenses, after this beautiful book and all this, what does specifically white Charleston and white America still need to learn about these kinds of stories for us to take forward to make this world a more equitable place? I know that's a big question, but I don't know how to. I'm sorry, Eddie. I know I don't know. I could try.
I hear you. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
And it's to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Appreciate you.
I mean, I think we need to take this history seriously. And, we didn't get to talk about it much, but we are seeing this assault on real American history. Unhumbly, I think this is real American history. And, I think we deny it and diminish it and erase it and whitewash it at our real peril. I encourage everybody to resist this notion that we can clean up our history, to read in ways that make us white people, we white people, more comfortable. I didn't write this book for a white audience. I wrote it for everybody, but it has been very interesting to me as it's rolled out over the last 4 or 5 months, that I think it has been white readers who have been most moved by it and most affected by it, which I appreciate. I did an event like this in Atlanta a week or two after the book came out, and there was a Q&A, and an African-American woman got up from the front row and said, thank you for the book, but this book is for white people. She said, we know this story, and she pointed out, I may not know the details, I may not know what happened at Emanuel or in Charleston, but we know this story. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. So in terms of what white America can do, I think we need to accept that this is our shared history. And I don't give a damn who your people are, when they got here, what they believed when they got here. It's still our shared history now. Thank you. My people weren't here during the Revolution. They weren't here during the Civil War. That's my history. So why isn't this all of our history in the same way? And I think it's only once we start to accept that we've got some ability to move forward.
Right. So we have some more questions, but I would say, it doesn't just feel white. Y'all look white. And we have to tell the story. And he does in the book about the changing environment around Emanuel,
Right.
about gentrification, about rising property taxes, about how North Charleston, where these folk who were once here ended up, a lot of them there. Right. So there's a reason why this place looks the way it looks. There's a reason why, in part, the church struggles in some ways, right? Because of the shifting nature of the composition of the communities, and we have to tell ourselves an honest story about who we are.
You'll see in the book that this was very much a neighborhood church back in the day. Everyone walked, took a short bus ride. Now there literally there's almost nobody who can walk to church on Sunday mornings. And as a result, it's tough to keep the membership up. It's tough to attract new members. And if you come in here on a Sunday morning, you might see 25% to a third of those in the pews are guests, many of them white. And that inevitably affects the vibe of the place and affects the sense of family in the place.
It's happened in Great Abyssinian in New York. It's across the country. So, questions? More mics? Yes, there's one up here.
First of all, thank you very much for this. I just wanted to mention to Mr. Glaude, there's a great quote apropos of what you were saying about white Charlestonians occasionally losing their mind. And some of you in the audience might be familiar. It's an abolitionist who on the eve of secession, the Articles of Secession, James Pettigrew described, South Carolina is too small to be a republic and too large to be an insane asylum. But Kevin, now that you're a Charlestonian, I think you have...
I got to stop you there. Please, you know better. I'm a resident of Charleston.
Don't get him in trouble.
But you are a Charlestonian now.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask your opinion. Right in front of us is a street that used to be called Boundary Street and is now named in favor of the former Vice President and virulent segregationist John C. Calhoun. His statue was taken down a block west of us now. Should Charleston consider renaming Calhoun Street?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's particularly... I think, I think it's... every time I drive here on a Sunday morning, I take note of it and just sort of shake my head and say, that is a contradiction that should not be any longer. I know there's a lot involved in that legally and in terms of the history of the community. But yeah, I think it's, it doesn't sound right? And I think that there were important symbolic things that came out of this, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive that something can be symbolic and important. I mean, I think the flag coming down mattered. I think the statue coming down mattered. If you notice when you walk outside and leave, there's a sign across the street that declares this the Mother Emanuel Way Memorial District, if I've got that right, which I think was very much an effort to sort of obscure the Calhoun part of the name. So yeah, I think it might be time.
Questions? Well done.
Thank you.
You guys are beautiful. You should see yourselves.
Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to kind of follow up on the first question, but more on a personal level. Because we have a heightened awareness now of making sure people can tell their stories, what checks and balances did you put in your process to make sure you were more of an ally, using your platform to elevate the story versus being, the white savior trying to take over the story? Yeah,
great question. I I tried to approach the topic from the get-go with an immense amount of humility and sensitivity. I mean, not only was I a racial outsider, I was a religious outsider, didn't grow up in the church, I'm Jewish, wasn't from here. That matters here, we all know. Matters here. So, yeah, I couldn't have been more of an outsider, but recognized that from the get-go. I think I also recognized that I had some real assets going into it, including an incredible passion for the subject, a pretty lengthy journalistic background writing about race, which I won't bore you with, but that, you know, this was not the first time I had walked into a black church or spent a lot of time reporting in a black church. And the pastor likes to talk about having a ministry of presence. I tried to practice a journalism of presence just by being here. My wife and I moved here for about 7 months in 2019, right before the pandemic hit. I was in my pew back there every Sunday and often during the week. The congregation was incredibly gracious, and I mean, I would sit there with my laptop open, you know, typing during the pastor's sermons, and they were fine with it. So they were great. But I really just tried to be here a lot and to be known, to show that my interest was long-term and deep. I think as I started to interview people and at length, hopefully word started to spread that, you know, this guy knows a little bit of what he's talking about, and he really is asking the right questions, and he's interested in us for the right reasons. One advantage I think I had was I think we had real common cause, the congregation and I, and that I felt strongly that this place should not be known only for that night, and I think they felt the same way. You know, their histories, their families, their legacies are tied up in this place, and they're immensely proud of it and should be, and they didn't want that to get lost. So we had that working for us. One other thing I did was I had a lot of backstopping. Good editors. I made sure to submit the book to any number of readers, including a number of African American readers beforehand, and persuaded the publisher to hire a sensitivity reader, which was an African American woman who read the manuscript looking for any place that my white boy ass might have stepped in it, you know? And she found a couple. But I mean, I had worked pretty hard to be sensitive about language and to be really attentive. And I think that made a difference too.
You succeeded. We have time for one more question. If not, yes.
Thank you, appreciate it. What experiences did you go through in your early life that ultimately put you on this trajectory and brought you in front of us today?
That's a great question. I grew up in a very segregated Jacksonville, Florida. Did not have, even though I graduated in 1977, so 23 years after Brown versus Board, I did not have a single black classmate all the way through my secondary school education. I went to Duke and was a history major, did make black friends in college, and more importantly, became really interested in modern American history and took a couple of courses that were heavily focused on civil rights and on the movement in particular. First time I ever walked into a black church, I'll tell the story, try to be brief because I love the story. I was an intern at the Atlanta Constitution the summer after my junior year in college. And I had a very good friend who was a fellow intern named Brenda Russell, a woman from Huntsville, Alabama, went to Harvard, bright, charming, engaging. And we could talk about anything, and did, and talked a lot about race, which was hard to avoid in the Atlanta of 1980. One day she says, you know, you ought to come to church with me. On Sunday, my Uncle Ralph is preaching. Okay. I couldn't come up with an excuse fast enough. You know. And I wind up jotting down directions to West Hunter Street Baptist Church and walk in, and it's only when I pick up the program that I realize that Uncle Ralph is Ralph David Abernathy. The iconic civil rights leader who succeeded Dr. King as president of the SCLC. So I immediately realized this was not going to be like any service I had ever been in when he, at the very beginning, he points at this woman in the front row and goes, my, is Mrs. Abernathy not looking fine this Sunday morning?
That's about right.
And I was like, I like this. This is not like the synagogue back in Jacksonville. And then he has all the visitors stand up, and we all do, and then we all sit down, and he points his finger. No, you, back up. And I'm the only white guy in the house. And he then proceeds to interrogate me. Yeah. Who are you? What brings you here? Oh, well, how do you know my niece? Well, what are you doing at the Constitution this summer? Where are you from? Where do you go to school? Where are you studying? Well, history of what? I mean, he let me sit there and sweat. It was probably 3 minutes. It felt like 3 days, right? Finally let me sit down, and I was like, what the hell was that about, you know? And maybe after 30 years in the pulpit, he was just entertaining himself, right? But what I took away from it was that he wanted me to feel my otherness, that he wanted me to feel what all of his congregants felt every minute of every day that they walked out of the protection of that building, and to feel the eyes of everybody in the room upon me, judging me. I still can feel it to this day. But the other stuff I took away from that day were just the music, which we're about to hear a great example of, the preaching, the enthusiasm, the sense of community, the raw political power of the place. You know, I was hooked on the black church, and I knew, I don't know if I knew at that moment, but I certainly came to know that there were great stories to be found at the intersection of faith and race.
Oh my goodness. So. Can we thank Kevin for this gift? And with that, we want to give it over to the choir.
You're in for a treat now.
You're in for the treat.
So many wonderful blessings, and so many open doors of brand new mercy.
We're going to dedicate this last selection to Kevin Sachs. You heard it, you know why.
I cannot
not sure if it's... Ladies and gentlemen, one more time for Dr. Wayne Singleton and the Mother Emanuel Choir. On behalf of Charleston Literary Festival, before you all file out, I just want to say a few things. I want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Wayne Singleton, to Pastor Manning, and to Mother Emanuel, the entire staff, Stephanie, all of the ushers, everybody who made us. We are guests here, and you all made us feel so extraordinarily welcome in this sacred space, so thank you so much. I also just quickly wanted to say two more things. I want to thank again the generous sponsors of this session, Deborah Kennedy Kennard and Bill Kennard. Please, the Joanna, Dr. Ann Manners and Dr. Alex Pappas, and the Joanna Foundation. And finally, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Dr. Eddie Glaude for being with us here today, and to Kevin Sack, and to the incredible Kevin Sack for the history that he's written. Everybody put your hand up here if you are a Charlestonian. You should read this book. Put your hand up if you live in Charleston. You should read this book. Put your hand up if this is your first time in Charleston. You should also read this book. Please read it, everybody. It's important. And it's what Dr. Glaude said. It holds all of our history. Everybody here in Charleston, so please read it. If you would like to meet with Kevin and Eddie, please stay here. Form an orderly queue down this side, the right side aisle. And Kevin will be signing books, and Dr. Glaude will be signing books. For the rest of you, I wish you a fabulous evening, and thank you again, everybody, for being with us.